which is the update on centralized surveillance with Executive Director Griffin, Bill McGregor, and then Phyllis and Kim from Maverick Gaming.
Thank you, Chair. Since this is a PowerPoint presentation, I'll just sit here if that is okay, or would you like me at the podium?
That's fine.
Thank you. And so I'll be giving this presentation together with Bill McGregor. So this is, next slide, please. This is just an update, as indicated on the initial slide, on where we're at with our discussion on centralized surveillance. And so just as a refresher, like where's this topic? How do we get to this topic? So in January of 22, Maverick Gaming petitioned for rulemaking asking for centralized surveillance. And then in February of 23, I was almost going to say earlier this year, but that was so last year, sorry. Seth made a recommendation to deny the petition before we had gotten to the 102 stage. So during the course of that conversation at the February meeting, Maverick Gaming decided to withdraw the petition with the understanding that staff would work with them on this topic over the next 18 months. And so that is why we are reporting back to you today. And I will say that we have been having monthly meetings for the most part, especially as of late with Maverick Gaming. And so they're going to give a presentation, though we did, share and coordinate information with them during the course of this preparation update for today. So next slide, please. So really not the objective, but the follow-up. The purpose of our presentation today is just to provide you an update of the research that we have done to date. In terms of, since this is our presentation, I'm going to summarize the state's research that we've done to date, and then just also summarize the what we intend to have with ongoing conversations with Maverick and their request to have centralized surveillance monitoring authorized within Washington. Next slide, please. So what we have found is we have found 2 states that have authorized centralized surveillance. I'm going to speak to the first state, or one of the states, and that is Colorado. And this is one of the states that
we lost mics on Teams. It looks like somehow you got muted.
Okay, so thank you, Nicole, for letting us know that.
You're welcome.
So Colorado is one of the states that authorizes centralized surveillance, and they have authorized it through their internal ICMPs, internal minimum control standards. And so not through rulemaking, but through internal control standards. Though their internal control standards do go through an outline process in rule, the board can set those internal control standards, the minimum standards that have to be in place for all of their licensees, and then they have to be approved. But if the board, I believe it is at Colorado, chooses to amend those internal control procedures, there is a process, again, as outlined in rule. They have to give so many days notice that they're seeking to make a change to their internal control procedures, and then they can receive comments, decide how to proceed with that comment, make those changes in whichever fashion they choose to make, and then post and give notice to licensees as to the changes that they must comply to. So when we looked at their laws and rules in regards to centralized surveillance in Colorado, we did find that their statute does authorize limited gaming in only 3 cities, of which those 3 cities are in 2 counties. So just as a little bit of background as I get more into the details. So what is in the minimum internal control procedures? regarding centralized surveillance are a couple lines, and one says that each casino must have a surveillance room in-house. Exceptions would be for commonly owned casinos, which are in the same county. And surveillance rooms must be within one of the commonly owned casinos. In terms of the staffing requirements, then it just says that staffing requirements for those combined casinos has to follow the minimum staffing requirements. But if you have combined surveillance rooms, basically the staffing requirements are based on the number of combined gaming devices amongst all commonly owned facilities. And gaming devices in Colorado equates to slots and table games. And outside of that, there are no specific rules or RCWs that we could find that talked about the requirements for combined surveillance, other than it can happen as long as they're in the same county amongst commonly owned facilities, and then the staffing requirements. Any questions about Colorado or so far in the presentation? Okay, and then next slide, please. Bill's going to talk about Nevada.
So Nevada has allowed some centralized surveillance rooms. It is only through a variance. The board chair, they have in their rules, the board chair may exempt a licensee from complying with casino surveillance standards. The criteria, there is no set criteria, and that those requirements are determined by the board chair. So they have set some, I believe, but there's nothing in statute or rules. And then the location of surveillance room is dependent on annual license gross gambling receipts or revenues. If they have more than 15 million, they have to maintain a surveillance room on the premises and be manned at all times. If it's less than 15 million, then they have to maintain a surveillance room, or they have to maintain in a secured location, which is on the premises. So it's similar to a surveillance room. I think under their definitions, it gets a little strange, but it's not required to be manned at all times. So those were the things, but again, it's by exception in there. Right now, a majority of the ones that are approved, I know we have the ones up north that Maverick Gaming has, that are not next to each other, but a majority of the ones approved in Nevada right now are casinos that are next to each other, with common ownership. So.
Thank
Next
you.
slide.
Next. Yes, thank you. So just to summarize the approaches that states have used to authorize centralized surveillance, Colorado, they have their requirements in internal minimum control procedures. And then Nevada does authorize a variance on a case-by-case basis. Next slide, please. I think
And
Bill's.
there's some topics for future discussions here. Some of the things that'll definitely have to be, and that is location of the monitoring room if we allow centralized surveillance. I believe both Colorado and Nevada require that be on a licensed premises. So it may be centralized, but it has to be on one of the licensed locations. Another topic for future possible discussion would be is the ratio of centralized surveillance rooms to house bank card rooms. So how many card rooms would we allow them to monitor in a central location? And then that also comes up with the location of them, or that is, Colorado's within the same county. Nevada, since they don't have it's only by variance, they're having them be next to each other for the most part. And in the staffing requirements, how many staff would they be required to have in the room? And then who'd be monitoring the entity. So there's some licensing issues as far as, is the monitoring room a separate entity or employees of the card room itself, and who can do that. So those are some issues that are going to have to be worked through. Equity of, compared to all card rooms in the state, not just Maverick properties. When we get down to who's going to be able to monitor the entity, how's that going to look for common ownership or identical ownership? There's different rules in different states on that. And then the other one that we recognize as a future topic, and that is what is the network requirements? What technology will be required to be used in order to do this remote surveillance rooms? So, next slide. We'll open it up. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to try and answer them. From our standpoint, our research as far as what we found in Colorado and Nevada, and then, or we'll turn it over to Maverick Gaming and let them do their presentation.
Madam Chair, so we've discovered that this is happening in 2 other states.
Yes. I'm sorry, I lost your audio, Commissioner.
Are the tribes in our state doing anything like this? Are any of them coming together? And do we have examples of tribal practices here?
To my knowledge, Tina can correct me if I'm wrong, but to my knowledge, there is no tribes doing centralized surveillance now.
Maybe not centralized, but not completely centralized. Do you know if maybe a few of them have come together to do surveillance? Or
We can explore that and bring that back to you if that's something you're interested in.
well, if I think that the tribes are successfully managing to do anything remotely like this, we should be aware of how they've been successful.
To my knowledge, they are not, but we can certainly check and make sure.
Any other questions?
Quick one. Just so I kind of understand the current landscape, anybody that's doing surveillance is an employee of the card room and licensed individually. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and the surveillance room essentially, or surveillance process and equipment, is an entity of the card room. So not an individual license for any surveillance company or anything like that.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes, we require 4 independent departments, surveillance being one of those.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Let's see, we have Maverick also giving a presentation with Phyllis Ermy and Kim McCabe.
Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Phyllis Ermy. I am the Executive Director of Compliance for Maverick Gaming. And I appreciate the opportunity to present on this specific topic, as it is really important to me. Next slide, please. Next slide. First, I will start with our overview. We're proposing centralized surveillance monitoring for our Washington locations. Centralized surveillance monitoring would provide the opportunity to observe card room gambling activity from individual card rooms to a centralized surveillance room. All existing surveillance equipment, the cameras, the DVRs, software, anything like that, will be remaining at the card room itself in a existing surveillance room that is secured. Our objective is to provide public safety and the safety of our patrons and our team members. That's number one. Centralized reporting, training, supervision, communication to provide consistency throughout our property surveillance monitoring is really, really important to us. Provide the gaming agents with real-time access to the surveillance to enable better response time to criminal activities, timely investigations, and video evidence collection would be wonderful. Next slide, please. One more. Thank you. Our proposal is to better protect the gaming operations and the public. So this is the reason why we're proposing this centralized surveillance operation. It is an efficient and effective way of maintaining security, ensuring regulatory compliance, providing a safe and enjoyable environment for our patrons, efficient and consistent operations across all the properties. We're designing to ensure that the gaming is conducted in an honest, competitive, and safe environment by providing public safety and would be increased by having centralized surveillance. Because we're not only going to have the surveillance observer, but we would have consistent supervision as well. So we would be able to have that team there to make sure everything was done as it's supposed to be, providing a larger footprint than our current model, with it's just one observer in the room by themselves. Also allowing a Washington State gaming agents to be able to review the footage, obtain the necessary video, provide all the enhancements that we feel would be more efficient for everybody. Next slide, please. Continuing with our proposal, drawing from our successful experience in other jurisdictions, employing centralized surveillance, we propose the establishment of a streamlined and efficient surveillance system for card rooms. Centralized surveillance operations, we could share expertise seamlessly across all card rooms. This approach facilitates the swing exchange of information, ensuring uniformity in reviews and reports. This in turn increases public safety and the safety of our guests and employees. We'd like to build a 24/7, 7 days a week, centralized room with multiple observers, and including supervisory personnel, which is very important. Our proposed centralized team would be comprised of our existing surveillance team with additional team members that have specialized skills in order to make sure that we cover more and can do more for our card rooms. Property management is trained or would be trained on the system so that they can quickly remote in, do what they need to do. If they're at the property, they can take care of any emergency situations that happen until the person from centralized can get there to handle any type of equipment errors or things like that. All properties have and will continue to have their own totally functioning operation surveillance system. Sorry. Our centralized room will act as the main viewing room and will have remote viewing of all properties. Next slide, please. So this picture kind of shows our proposal of what a Maverick centralized surveillance room would look like. It will help the casino to ensure compliance with the regulations and maintain a safe and secure environment for our guests and staff. A manager in the room with all the observers, ensuring procedures are followed every time, being consistent, gathering information, getting things done the way it needs to be. Next slide, please. Some advantages of centralized surveillance: standardized processes, specifically with incident response time. Implementing standardized process across card rooms has shown a decreased incident response times by 15%, enhancing the overall security posture. Supervision and training cost efficiency. Centralized supervision training results in cost savings. of approximately 10% and 20% improvement in staff proficiency, contributing to more effective surveillance practices. Centralized viewing and reporting, enhanced incident documentation. Centralized report writing improves the accuracy and completeness of incident reports, leading to a 25% reduction in investigation time and more thorough analysis of gambling activities. External surveillance access, improved oversight and collaboration by allowing gaming to look at some of the things that they want to look at, the gaming agents, that will allow them to get more accurate in what they have to find immediately, therefore increasing other investigations and things like that. Next slide, please. More advantages of centralized surveillance, enhanced security. It allows for the comprehensive monitoring of the entire casino premise, including gaming floor, entrance, exit, allow us to look at more, which would prevent theft, cheating, and other criminal activity. Quick response time to incidents. Having all surveillance monitors and operators in one location enables a swift response time. It helps the security personnel intervene properly, prevent potential problems with escalating. With multiple personnel in the room, each can focus on specific tasks to enable a timely response. And then the efficient monitoring, I go into that a little bit more detailed. When it comes to observers who can quickly switch from different cameras, the ability to track movement. There's more people helping each other. Coordination with security personnel. Centralized surveillance room can easily communicate with on-the-ground security personnel, allowing for real-time coordination during security events or emergencies. One observer, surveillance observer in the room could be watching the incident. The other one could be gathering the video evidence. One can call law enforcement. One can be on the phone with security, working as a team in order to gather what is necessary. Again, evidence collection. In the event of disputes, theft, or other incidents, a centralized surveillance room can provide high-quality video evidence to assist investigation and legal proceedings. The ability of the state-of-the-art equipment with centralized conveniences that will allow gaming to see the video, but also working with them with the point-to-point secure connection. Next slide, please. So some of the disadvantages that we have, limited coverage. We have one observer, and it's very impossible to cover the entire casino floor. Gaming tables, cashier, conducting reviews, writing reports, observing fills and credits, and other items that are requirements that we need to watch and gather. So that limits the ability to get that coverage. Inadequate response time. In the event of a single operator, I have one operator, they've got all these other things going on, and they also have a situation where they need to react quickly. Sometimes they freeze. What do I do first? Having multiple people there to work together, get through it, more efficient. Monitoring fatigue. Continuous monitoring of multiple screens and areas can lead to an operator's fatigue, and it causes a lot of stress for the observer. They're watching, it's essentially watching a TV for 8 hours, but per whack, they only get a 30-minute break. So to me, it's watching TV 8 hours, and then for 30 minutes, you get to walk away from that. It's very strenuous, causes a lot of fatigue. A lot of observers have that issue. Lack of backup and support. In the absence of additional operators, you don't have somebody to what we call second eyes, a second opinion. Look at this. Am I seeing this correctly? Sometimes after watching for that long of a time, your eyes can play tricks on you. Am I really seeing this? Is this really what I'm observing? So that's also an issue. Risk of collusion. A single operator scenario. One operator, one observer who is watching this friend of theirs pocket money. Can happen. Only 2 people know about it, therefore the casino suffers. So that would decrease that as well. I will now turn it over to Kim McCabe.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with you. I'm in charge of corporate compliance for the company. And so I've got over 30 years in gaming, and I've experienced centralized surveillance in many different jurisdictions. So hopefully I can answer any of those kind of questions. But we'll go through what our experience is currently with our Nevada and Colorado properties. So in both of those states, we went through the regulatory approval process. And I know Tina and Bill have described some of that process. I'll go into further details here. But this presentation basically will highlight the benefits that we've experienced in having centralized surveillance in those areas. And you know, as far as the approval process, I will review that, but we did go through that. And each jurisdiction had their own set of requirements, of course, that we had to go through and get approvals for. So next slide, please. So in Colorado, as mentioned previously, it's through an ICMP process. And we have 3 properties there and a gas station that are currently under centralized surveillance. So we have one room that is monitoring all 4 of those areas. And they are not adjacent properties. The approval process there has already been described and explained to you, but I'm happy to answer any questions that we experienced as part of that approval process. Next slide, we can go on to Nevada. So in Nevada, as mentioned previously, it is a variance approval process. And there it is, it's pretty standardized, even though it's not in writing. So even prior to applying for it, the Nevada Gaming Control Board told us what criteria we would have to meet to gain approval there. And so even in our request letter, it kind of set forth a criteria that would be conditioned of our approvals. And so we went through that process. Also within Nevada, I know that it was mentioned, next slide, I'm sorry. Thank you. So with Nevada law, basically more than 15 million in gaming revenue, you have to maintain and operate that room on premise. So it has to be within the licensed location. And it has to be manned. And they are allowed a 1-hour break every 8 hours. So that's the rules for locations with 15 million or more in gaming revenue. And now for those properties with less than 15 million, it's maintained and operated from a secure location. That does not necessarily mean that it's on the licensed premise. And there's no requirement for a manned surveillance room at that point. So there has to be one person on property, which it could be a GM or anybody basically that could help operate and gain access to the room and have knowledge of the equipment. Now our properties currently in Nevada, we have 4, and there are we have 2 that are 120 miles away from our surveillance room, and we're currently operating centralized surveillance. So the standards here in Nevada though for 15 million or less in gross gaming revenue, basically you don't have to have a manned surveillance room. California law for card rooms is basically very similar to that. If you have under 31 tables, they're not requiring a manned surveillance room either. So do you have any questions so far about those jurisdictions I mentioned? There are other jurisdictions. We're still trying to gain some information to provide to the board. Virginia recently just approved Churchill Downs with 7 properties that aren't adjacent. So I'm trying to gain that information to provide to the board so that they can have that as well for reference. And next I'm going to discuss the topology. Yes, thank you. You're keeping up with me without me even saying next slide. Thank you. So centralized network topology. So this is basically, it's a secure transmission line, firewalled, password protected from both ends. It ensures encrypted information, and it can be terminated at the host location. So that's very important. So that way, if you have any kind of breach or anything like that, you can terminate it from there. It's modeled after what we've already implemented in Nevada and Colorado. And the data is transferred via secure point-to-point tunnels utilizing 128-bit encryption between firewalls. Surveillance networks are restricted and isolated from other networks, so it's a segregated network from any other network within the properties. And each site's connected with fiber. So if you have any technical questions, we do have our head of IT here that could answer those questions. I'm definitely not the IT person, so do you have any questions regarding this? This is something further that we would discuss with the board prior to approvals and things like that, rulemaking, because we'd want to make sure that this is something agreeable to both sides, right? So, but we're already doing it now. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So basically, in summary here, a centralized room provides an efficient, effective means of maintaining security, ensuring regulatory compliance, providing a safe and enjoyable environment for our guests and staff. Centralized surveillance monitoring systems designed to ensure gaming is conducted with honest, competitive, and safe environment. So in the past, you know, the networks, technology's come a long way, right? So in the past, and even when the WACs are written, you probably couldn't have foreseen where we are today. But the systems are very advanced, very secure. And next slide, please. So, I mean, you know, some systems even have where you have facial recognition and things like that. So, I mean, the technology has come a long way since the WACs were written. So what we're proposing is that we update the WACs and accommodate changes in for the changes in technology so we can move forward with a centralized surveillance. And we do look forward to the further conversations that I know we'll have to get there. So with that being said, I think Eric's got something to add to the presentation. Do you have any questions for me? No? Okay. Step aside.
Hi guys, so Eric Person, owner of Maverick. I think it might be helpful to sort of go back and talk about centralized surveillance, but let's sort of talk for a moment what surveillance agents do. And because I think there's a perception on TV and movies, and then there's like the reality of what surveillance agents actually do, and they're sort of different. And so here's what surveillance agents do in any jurisdiction I've been in, and I do have like 100 licenses. So I've been to like multiple countries and been in multiple states. But one thing that's universal, what surveillance agents do is they verify things like fills and credits on a table. They verify cage transactions. All of their requirements are outlined in the WACs, Washington, and they're pretty standard. And then that's the thing they do as a baseline. And then what happens is what they do is we say, hey, a bartender's stealing, or we think this table lost a lot of money and I need you to take a look at it and make sure all the pays and takes were done properly, and that you know, customers are getting a fair shake and there wasn't like collusion between a dealer and a customer, for example. And that could go both ways, because a dealer could be stealing from a player, or a player could be in collusion with a dealer and stealing from the house. And so those take time, but they're not done in real time. They're done, you know, while the surveillance agent's sitting there and they're reviewing tape. And then sometimes there's things like money lending in Washington, for example. And we have a tape and there's a person lending money, and they go back and they find that. And then because that's a problem, it's illegal in the state, we would self-report. And a gaming agent in this world that we live today would drive from wherever they're at. They'd go over to Lakewood. It's the last place it happened. And they'd get down there and they would get in the little booth and they would review the tape. And maybe they think, wow, this is really something. And so could I please have a copy? And they can take a thumb drive. But when this started, it was a VHS tape. It was just a VHS tape in this room. But now they can, luckily, they still have to drive down there, but it's a little thumb drive and they can take it back wherever they want. And they use it as part of their investigative report. And maybe later they have to drive to another place and all day long. And, you know, so it's like, I think people think because of movies that there's a surveillance agent in the sky and he's watching in real time and this hand's been misset and someone's been paid when they shouldn't, and they catch it and they call down and they go, you paid that guy, but you shouldn't. That does not really happen. Very, 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 very rarely does that ever. We wish it. Well, maybe our deals are really perfect, so it never has to happen. But I sort of suspect it just doesn't happen that much. But what they do is they do a lot of work, and the work they do is these reports, and they help us find theft, and they help protect customers, and they help protect the business as well, and they help ensure that regs are enforced, because we all know that we have customers and team members that, work for companies that sometimes aren't following the regs. And so we somehow get wind of it, and a surveillance agent assists that, typically with the Washington State Gambling Commission. And then we review that tape and we sort of, administer, how we should. And so what I would say was the purpose of centralized surveillance is right now we have two realities, right? We have the reality of what really is today, which is where we find out somehow something bad has happened, and we ask our agents, Phyllis, working with, goes, hey, we heard something happened. Riverside needs to review this tape, and then the agent makes a report and comes back. Based on that, we tell the gaming commission, or maybe it's not a commission issue. If it's not a commission issue, it's just a employee discipline. We would just deal with it. But if it's a commission issue, we'd notify the WSGC, and then their investigator would come out, and in conjunction, we do our investigation. But it's super inefficient, right? Because there's no reason that you have to have one person sitting in a very small room, which I would say is like 4 feet by 6 feet on average for surveillance rooms, sitting all by themselves. And last time I was robbed in one of my properties in Macau, they were playing Candy Crush because they're in the room by themselves. We don't know if it was Candy Crush. Do you know if it was Candy Crush? But they were definitely not observing the robbery while they were in the room. I guess that's an issue of training, but really it's an issue of isolation. They're by themselves. They're in a room by themselves, 8 hours a day or so. And so by having centralized surveillance, we could have this reality, because what happened next after the robbery, some agent, I don't know which one, Tina might know, like drove down there and had to take a look. But if we had centralized surveillance, they could do it from their desk. This is like 2024, I think, and there's no reason to drive 40 minutes. Like when you're talking about the inefficiencies to breathe life into things that Phyllis and Kim were talking about, this is part of the inefficiency. They actually have to drive there. And then when they drive there, they have to get a little thumb drive. Then they have to take that thumb drive back, and then they have to make a report. They could be sitting at their desk, which I would pay for. The card rooms would pay for this agent who's working with this. Like, we're happy to provide that. It's a better product. There is labor efficiency. It's fantastic, because you don't have to have one card room surveillance agent in each card room. Like, for whatever it's worth, it's a different state. California, there's only a few states that have card rooms. California is one. You don't even have to have live surveillance in most states. And that's because you're not catching live transactions. It's not that it's less secure. Like in like Nevada, for example, at my Red Garter, I don't have to have live surveillance. I have tables and I have slots, but I don't have a live surveillance agent. It's all being recorded. And yes, there's a GM who could get access to the room, but it's important to understand what is the purpose of a surveillance agent. And typically it's like to investigate, to review tape, to go through, and then to verify some things that are very clearly defined in the WAC, which is mainly the transferring of chips into the cage or cage back into cash to a customer over certain large amounts. And so it's not really about having, one agent per card room. It's about having enough agents to sort of thoughtfully be able to do all the investigative services while providing the necessary WAC requirements so that people who come in and gamble in the state of Washington have a fair shake. And that, when they're supposed to get paid $1,000 because they have 1,000 in chips, they don't get 900. That's one of the things they do in the state. But you don't need one at every property. And you don't need your agents using their time driving to the property when they could just be sitting at a desk watching in real time live and providing some level. I believe they would actually provide some level of support and service. Actually, it'd be a better product because they might see, it's more eyes. They might happen to see things while they're, watching this in real time versus only watching things when they're notified by us, which is what happens now. My proposal would provide a direct access to the WSGC to review all of my tapes in real time. It's not tapes, coverage in real time. Tapes don't exist anymore. They existed when this reg made. But, so did people riding around on horses, right? But now we have Teslas. So let's move forward, please. That's my proposal. Any questions? I'll sit down. Okay.
Questions or comments? Freddie and Aaron were both signed up for in-person, but you're with Maverick too, right? So is that just for questions or if necessary? Okay. So we're not decisions here today. That was just an update on the research requested. So Thank you, everybody. I think that that was helpful. Good information. If there's no other comments, then I think we can move forward. Do you have something?
What's going to happen next with this issue?
I don't know. That too. Where do we go? Where are we going from here, Tina, with respect to that issue?
We're continuing our discussion. It hasn't been 18 months yet, and we're continuing our discussion. I'll leave it to Maverick to.
That's great. I have a comment. I don't know. I don't know all the pros and cons associated with this yet, and listen carefully, but I want to tell you that I visited early on in my tenure here one of these rooms, and it was so dang depressing. I just couldn't imagine going to work every day and sitting alone in that little bitty room with those screens. It's not natural for human beings to be isolated for that long, alone, away from other people. And it's not reasonable to expect them to be able to pay attention to those screens. It would drive me crazy. I think it would drive you crazy after a while. And I came out of that room in one of the card rooms, and I just felt so sorry. So that's my emotive contribution to this discussion at this point in the discussion. I don't know what the cons are here associated with this proposal, but I will tell you that that working condition I thought it was inhumane. It felt very unnatural. And I just, if I were hired in that job, I don't think I'd be able to do a good job in there. I wouldn't be able to focus because I need other people around me. Who doesn't? So for what it's worth, I will say that the nature by which, the way in which we currently do this work is not conducive to good mental health for those employees, in my unprofessional opinion. I'll say that.